You're listening to Foodagogy, where we explore what food can teach us about becoming totally inclusive schools. I'm Angeline Aow, and I believe that dynamic conversations about inclusion, diversity, and equity happen around the table. Every episode, I sit down with someone whose relationship with food reveals something essential about identity, community, and belonging. The same things we're trying to cultivate in our classrooms. Whether you are wrestling with inclusion in your institution, a foodie, curious about culinary cultures, or simply someone who believes that every child deserves to thrive at school, you belong here. Thank you for tuning into these food-related conversations that nourish both heart and pedagogical practice. Let us chew on the roots of what's really on our plates. Welcome, Milkyas Goitom. Today I'm joined by an advocate for decolonization who raises awareness of colonial history, neocolonialism, and racism in schools. So someone who really works to create spaces for people to critically engage with the legacies that continue to shape our world today. We're very excited to have someone here who brings years of experience in business development and community partnerships with a focus on creating more equitable opportunities for marginalized and international communities. And so his insights will help us connect economic, social, and educational perspectives, making him a powerful voice in conversation about decolonization, social justice, and how we can transform the world into a more equitable place. So I'm so excited to dive into today's topic with Milkyas around what in German is called Kolonialwaren and what it means to decolonize produce. And so before we kind of head into all that meaty stuff, I want to, as a way for you to introduce yourself, Milkyas, I want you to tell us about you. Share with us your earliest food memories.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm actually flattered. My heritage is Eritrean, so my family comes from Eritrea. So my earliest food memory is the Eritrean food. You know, Sundays my dad used to cook injera and gitcha fit for us. So we would always have like this Eritrean dish as a breakfast on every Sunday, more or less. And my mom also on occasions did Eritrean food. So these are like my first memories of like how I got introduced to food and also the differences in what my friends ate and what I got in kindergarten, for example, compared to what I had at home.
And if I remember correctly, like your kindergarten experience was in Stuttgart, in Germany, right? And so very different where it would have been bread and condiments and things like this compared to then, a very different food culture that you would have had in your home.
Definitely. And it was super interesting because in Stuttgart, it's a very traditional area of Germany, I would say. You know, even the food culture in Stuttgart, the Swabian food culture, is known all around Germany, like Maultaschen, Spätzle, the typical German dishes. They're mostly from the south of Germany. Some are from Bavaria and some are from Swabian or like Schwaben, so it's the Stuttgart area. And yeah, so I grew up with a nice German kitchen around, but also a very different and also very known and nice kitchen from home. You know, a lot of spices. We eat always with the hands, and there's not even a word in our language that describes fork or spoon or whatever. We use Italian words for that because the colonialism brought us basically the fork and the spoon before we were not used to use that in our food culture, you know? So yeah, that's how different the food culture is in Eritrea compared to, for example, in Germany.
And did you, when thinking about your earliest food memories and the differences, then I would imagine then that you had to like code switch from eating with your hands at home to not doing that at school, where there's going to be very different interpretations of what that means.
Exactly. It's like if I would eat with fork and spoon, the Eritrean dishes, my parents would go crazy. They would be like, we didn't raise you that way.
A quick pause here. You may have noticed Milkyas used the word crazy, and moments later, I use it too. I want to acknowledge that crazy is an ableist term that trivializes mental health experiences and reinforces stigma around mental illness and neurodivergence. As the host of Foodagogy, I take full responsibility for not catching this in the moment and for not creating a space for learning at the time. I missed opportunities to be more intentional with inclusive language use. Anti ableist practice is part of being a truly inclusive practitioner, and that includes me, continuously learning, unlearning, and doing better. You'll find more about this in the show notes and in the Foodagogy Transfers resource for this episode.
And the other way around, if I would use my hands in the kindergarten to eat my food, I would probably get punished, or at least someone would say something that I should use the fork or the spoon to eat like everyone else is, right? So I knew from like a very early stage on that there are differences, and I have to kind of adapt it to my surrounding, to where I am, and to what I have in front of me. So like even as a kid, if I would have Eritrean food in the kindergarten, I would probably still eat it with my hand because that's how we should eat it, you know? And the other way around, when we go to weddings or to places, people put all kind of foods on the plates. So there's Eritrean food, but there's also, for example, lasagna on it. You know, Eritrea has an Italian history with colonialism. So we have a lot of lasagna and pasta and stuff. It's very known in Eritrea and everyone eats it, everyone knows it. So on weddings, you always have lasagna, and you put this on your plate, and you even eat the lasagna with your hands, like because it's on your plate already. You're not gonna take out a fork just to eat one part of your plate, you know. So yeah, there's differences, but by now I just mix everything and I eat how I want, to be honest.
Yeah, sounds like my younger son, who's 11, he would love that. He loves to eat everything with his hands. And even though we have no Eritrean culture in our family or food culture with that, but he always tells me, he says, but it just tastes better.
And that's so true. That's what I also learned in a very early age. That's like it just tastes better. I don't know why, but it tastes better. I can eat better with my hands than with fork and knife. Like in a way that the food tastes better. It's just it's more exciting, you know. If you know what you're getting because you just have it in your hand, you know how it feels, you know how it maybe the texture is and whatever. I guess
Yeah.
for kids it's also nice, and they also do it a lot actually. Kids like
Yeah. And yeah, so I grew up in a household where we use chopsticks and also fork and spoon, and very, very rarely a knife, because everything is cooked into smaller pieces. So you wouldn't need a knife, right? So when you stir fry something, everything's in a smaller piece, etc. And so I know Italians would probably go crazy about this, but I love, like, if I'm eating spaghetti, I cannot eat with a fork and a spoon and not make a mess, but I like to eat it with chopsticks, like, because that's how I grew up eating noodles,
That's so
like
cool.
if it's noodles, we have to have chopsticks in a bowl,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah.
Actually, I like chopsticks too. I mean, I just recently learned it. So I went to a Vietnamese restaurant, had my chopsticks in the hand, but I couldn't really eat this rice, so I left it and I took the spoon again and ate it like this. But that's so cool. Like I think it's a very nice tool, and like it's so easy but so smart. Like it's just two sticks, but you can do
Yeah.
everything with it.
I think this is where a big difference is. So I would personally never eat rice with chopsticks from a plate.
Yeah.
That is impossible. So you're not wrong.
Okay,
But
good.
because if we're eating rice and it would be in a bowl, and so the chopsticks would be used as a scoop, right? And so, yeah, and so you would lift the bowl close to your mouth, and the chopsticks kind of are helping you to scoop in. And if we use rice on a plate, like I was born in Malaysia, and so we would use a spoon and fork with that, right? So, yeah, so yes, we would definitely grab a spoon instead, but the rice would work with the chopsticks, but only in a bowl in your hand. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense now. I have to try it
Yeah.
next time.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we've inadvertently also kind of talked about, the influence of colonialism on cutlery, on crockery, ways we eat. It's kind of transforming things and new cultures that are then built around that. But also, I think in food itself, we have different goods, resources that are available in different places that have, moved around the world as a result of colonization.
Yeah.
Which is where that Kolonialwaren, term is there. And the term itself, being colonial goods in Germany, it's still very present in Germany. And so what do you think this kind of lingering presence reveals about how colonialism continues to shape our daily lives and consumption habits?
So when I think of Colonialwaren, The first thing that pops up in my mind is basically Edeka. I don't know if you know, but like Edeka has a specific meaning. It stands for E, D, and K. So in German, that's E, D, and K. And for those letters, it says Einkaufsgemeinschaft der Kolonialwarenhändler. So buying association for colonial goods, basically. So this is what this comes from, right? And Edeka, for those who don't know, is one of the biggest chains of supermarkets here in Germany. So this is actually really big and no one knows about it. That's how they got big. That's how everyone knew them back then. And they never changed their name, right? Like, I don't want to blame Edeka now. I just want to make the people understand like how big the influence of colonialism is still in today's world, and a lot of things that we still use or buy or go to are still things that come from that time, right? Or are still using the same methods and the same strategy to actually make use of that. That's what comes up to my mind first. And then when you look at what they actually sold in the first years, it was mostly like coffee, chocolates, exotic fruits like mango, banana. It's like in 1901, for example, in Germany, the whole banana mango was never a thing and became super new and super expensive. Everyone wanted to have these exotic fruits. Coffee became a thing. And to drink coffee was back then something very expensive and bougie. Only rich people could afford that. And so if you're actually a supermarket that sells this, you're a high class supermarket and you make a lot of money with this on top of not really paying for what you buy, right? So like they actually get this from farms where back then was slavery, and it was just stolen land and stolen goods made by hands that are also stolen. So they basically sold something very expensive and they never paid for it. And on the other hand, you have a culture that's evolved in Europe around coffee, chocolate. And there's today still the biggest chocolate producers, the biggest coffee producers. It's all Western companies, and they're all based in those colonial countries, right? If you look into Germany, has a huge industry of sweets, and this all comes from them. Germany had Togo, had parts of Ghana, had Cameroon as a colony, and those are still, by this day, the biggest cacao producers in the world. And that has a reason. The same for Belgium or France.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing about the meaning behind, Edeka, such a common supermarket chain here. And like you said, I think a lot of people don't know about the history of these organizations that have been around for a very long time. And when we think about the colonial history that is still very recent, they're carrying and have been built on that and are still benefiting from that foundations as well. And so, in your opinion, then, if we're trying to decolonize produce and consumption, what does it mean in your view to decolonize the way in which we, source and buy and consume products as well? Because, you mentioned like, we don't want to blame people for different things, but we want to be more conscious of where does our food come from, who profits from it, and what stories are embedded in its journey so that we can be more ethical in our consumption.
Yeah, no, very good question, very important question. Unfortunately, there is no super clear answer. I think at the end it needs a political change to do that. I don't know if you know, but in Europe we had this law called Lieferkettengesetz. So it's basically like supply chain law that looks into where your products come from, how are they produced. They have to make sure that there's no child labor, that there is no slavery, that there is no stolen goods, that everything is correct, basically, right? So that's what they should look at. But then there's countries like Germany that wouldn't sign this law, so it never got put in place. So these are things that would help, obviously, to rethink of our colonial structures that are still in place. Because if you look at, for example, the biggest chocolate producers, right? They have still agreements with countries that are from 1900s, right? So like 100 years or longer agreements that they got forced to sign, basically. And they're still using those agreements to make sure that they don't have to pay any taxes, that they can still do the import and export easily, that they can use whatever labor they find, that they don't need to pay a fair share to the workers. So these are all things that need to be taken a look at. And I think if you want to change it, the first thing is go regional, like all your food and stuff, don't buy it from farms that are based anywhere in the world. Just try to buy it regional. And then if you buy things that can't be grown here or you need to import, then check where it comes from, which country. Is still child labor a thing? Is the company using fair trade marks? There's different organizations that try at least to look at it. There's also a big discussion about how much fair trade makes a difference, but at the end, we need some measurements that we have to look at. And so also this fair trade can help to make decisions that are or should be better than what we are using by now, because what we use now is horrible. Like if you look at how much child labor is still a thing, I think we all need to rethink how we consume.
Yeah, sad to hear that the country that we both live in Germany and here in Berlin, that it was one of the countries that didn't sign this. And I'm sure there are lobbies that, don't want to comply because there is one measurement of profit and success, right?
Yeah.
So instead of like being socially responsible to say, actually a measure of our success is if we're able to serve communities better and better engage with communities and do what is like fair and in accordance with human rights practices. But no, it's not how we measure success. Or how we're going to measure success is if we can comply with a really, really old law and use that to our advantage, because it still can be upheld through colonial practices that are not serving the people who were there at that, or who are there now as well. And so a lot of this is, I guess you could say, is knowledge that we would never learn in school. But I think that's changing. Schools are trying to decolonize the content of their curricula, and trying to do better, and represent history books that have always perpetuated certain narratives to make it more accurate and more factual as well. And so when we're thinking about, decolonizing what we learn, what would be your advice perhaps to schools, to uncover and challenge these kind of colonial legacies that are, perpetuated over and over again?
Yeah, first of all, it's so true. Like actually, schools, they now are starting to rethink, and especially teachers that are very engaged, I would say, or have a big heart, or like they have some knowledge about it, or they want to make a change or be the change. I can see this more and more. I mean, your school is also a good example. You invited me to your school, and we had this whole thing, and also other schools do that, and try to make a difference. And I guess at the end, the best way to do this is by knowledge, teach kids what is really happening out there. Let them research themselves. What is child labor about? Why is it still a thing today? What can we do against it? I remember I had this in religion class when I was maybe in fifth, sixth grade. We had this story about a girl in Guatemala that was working on a coffee farm. She was working there, and her life was kind of explained in that story, and we had to do a presentation about it. And every group had a different story about a different kid from a different world, from a different place, basically, and we had to present about it. And this was in fifth or sixth grade, and I'm now 30 years old, and I can still remember exactly how this was and how it affected me. And how from this moment on, I was like talking to my parents, can we please buy fair trade chocolate? Can we please buy fair trade? Even if it's just young kids that get it taught every year a bit, or maybe do school, like schools always have like project days, maybe do like let's change the world day, or how can we be the difference or something. Actually, that wasn't your school kind of a thing. but it's so good because it makes kids rethink. And the only person that can talk to the parents and maybe convince them of something else are the kids themselves, because an adult won't be so open to get taught new things. But if your own kid is talking with you about it, maybe you have a different view on it,
Thank you. Yeah, it was great. So earlier this year in March, you came and we had an association of German international schools in the primary school level. So we wanted to have a guest speaker that would help inspire the student leaders who were there to think about decolonization. And you gave some great examples of that. And yeah, a lot of the students responded by really thinking about the new knowledge that they had and what this means for them in schools and some of the legacies that they're still a part of. And I think, when you said, I think, knowledge really is the power, right? So
Yeah.
when we know something that we then want to use that information to do better. We want students to do that and take it into action and to be able to think, how am I going to use what I know now into action? Like students then going back to their families and saying, can we buy fair trade chocolate like you did? That's a behavior change we want to see, right? And so if we're cultivating, ethical behaviors from the beginning, then that's going to carry on. But I think it can be quite hard if to change an existing routine or behavior that you already have. So I know, for example, someone might have brand loyalty to certain things that were not, as ethically produced as we would hope. And then
Nutella.
so yeah, exactly. Like with Nutella, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
with a
great
lot of palm oil. And
yeah.
so it's such a
Yeah.
beloved brand.
Yeah.
And so, people find it really hard to shift from that routine in
Yeah.
order to do that. And so so legacies can be really strong, but unlearning things is like a really hard aspect.
I agree. I agree. I think that's why I said in the beginning, like, I think the first thing that needs to be changed is the political thing, because if it's changed on a political aspect, then we will make sure that we will find a way to still get our products, but maybe now in a fair way, or even if it's 20 cents more each product. If the child doesn't need to work in a mine or in a farm, I'm good with that, So it's like, and I think many people would. And I mean, to be honest, if I buy things in the supermarkets and like if I wouldn't know, I would think, of course, we're in Germany. Like there's no child that did this, Like no one in Germany would be okay with buying things that are created by children's hands, that should normally go to schools and want to learn things, but they have to work on farms, So like these point of view is very difficult to understand or to make sure, because we as a German society, we have no saying or whatsoever in how our products are made, but we can decide which products we buy. And if you know that most of the products that are out in the market are created by forced or child labor, then you get a different view on that. But it's unfortunately not so known. And then you said something very correctly before. You said there's a lot of lobbyists that work against that. And that's so true. It is a big thing. One of the biggest lobby groups in Germany is actually the sweets lobby. It's crazy,
Wow.
but it's billions of euros that this market is creating in Germany, right? So we're selling sweets to all around the world. We're creating sweets for all kind of stuff. And yeah, that's why this lobby is so big. They have a huge office in Brussels. So even on the EU parliament, they're doing a lot of things. And then also in Germany, obviously, and in many other countries. So they're very powerful. But I hope just the politicians, they understand, because at the end, they're all human, and we need to humanize ourselves more and have more empathy for each other, because at the end, we all want the same thing, we all want a better world for us and for all of us.
What an excellent point. And when you say we need to humanize ourselves more, I mean, that's also in recognition that people around the world are being dehumanized,
Yeah.
right? So, like if it's out of sight, out of mind for us in our very comfortable existence here in Germany, where, we don't need to think about, the dehumanization of a people who are not profiting from their labor and are being exploited still, and in a very dehumanizing way, right? And so I think that that's a very good point to say, what we wouldn't accept that if that was happening in Germany.
Yep.
Right. And so why are we accepting it? So, if we can shift our own purchasing power, then I think that's also power. And then who knows, maybe perhaps if we have a more humanizing curriculum that is also decolonizing and indigenizing what we can offer in terms of different perspectives, then perhaps these children will become the politicians we need.
Exactly. That's actually what I'm hoping for, that the generation that is coming after after us as actually creating something big and changing something, you know. And it's, to be honest, to be fair, the point of why I think that is also that a lot of parents nowadays, they have way more knowledge about how to raise a child. They can gain the knowledge from the internet. They can find information about almost anything. And a lot of people are using that. And so I see, when I go to schools, I see so many bright, smart, and different thinking students compared to when I was a student. Or maybe that's how I feel it. But it's really interesting, and it's really giving me a lot of hope to see the next generation grow up and to understand the issues in the world a bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a joy hearing the children's perspectives, and they do bring us hope. But what I'm also hearing is that we shouldn't just rest on them, but we can also take actions too as adults, and we need to, to make sure that we're not gatekeepers to that knowledge, and we're also like consciously learning about that ourselves and being intentional about our choices and what we expose our children to in terms of knowledge as well.
Definitely. That's how it works at the end.
Yeah, amazing. So to close us off in our episode today, I'd like to ask something I ask everybody. Like, what is your go-to comfort food, Milkyas?
I think I already talked about injera, but since I'm not living my hometown anymore, I miss it so much. It's injera with tzepi, which is like a spicy sauce with some meat in it, and the injera is like the traditional Eritrean food, which is like, looks like a pancake with holes in it, like bubbly holes, and it's like sourdough. And with that, you take a piece of it and you dunk it into the sauce, and it's just so good. It's so good. Yeah, you have to try it if you never did.
No, it is really good. I have tried it. It tastes better with your hands.
Yes, 100%. As your child would say, it tastes better with the hand.
Exactly. And what about you, Milkia? So, if you were to cook for someone you treasure, what would you have on the menu, and why? Would it be the same thing, or would it be something different?
It wouldn't be injera because I don't know how to cook it, and it would be lasagna. I love lasagna. I always did. So at some point, I love cooking too. And at some point, I just started doing lasagna. And then I guess now I perfected it.
What makes your lasagna special?
I let the sauce slowly cook. So like for 8 hours, something 6 and 8 hours. And then I use a lot of different vegetables that are normally not that usual for the ragu bolognese sauce. I use like zucchini, for example, and some other vegetables that I put into the sauce, and I think it makes it just more powerful.
Amazing. Well, it sounds like cooking for someone you love is something that you also are putting a lot of love into as well.
100%.
Like a sauce that's like simmering for 8 hours, and you're really like nurturing it as an expression of all the beautiful things that make us human.
100%. No, I love food, and I love how food brings people together and how it creates like a nice environment, and it comforts people, it makes people feel connected, it makes people try new things and be a bit more open, experimental. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and the insights that you've given us around how we can decolonize our food practices and the importance of sharing this knowledge with our students. Thank you, Milkyas.
Thank you, Angeline. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to Milkyas Goitom for sharing your food memories, lived experiences, and insights on decolonizing what we consume, and for reminding us that knowledge is the most powerful ingredient for change. You can find out more about Milkyas through the links in the show notes. If this conversation sparked something for you, share this episode with one colleague who needs to hear it. And be sure to engage with the Foodagogy Transfers resource, where you can dig deeper into the 4 big themes arising from this episode. Before you go, what's one idea from this conversation you're taking back to enhance your practice? Maybe it's looking more closely at the label on your next purchase, or finding a way to bring the story of colonial goods into your classroom, and how we can decolonize our practices. Share your thoughts with a friend, colleague, or student, and connect with me on LinkedIn to share your biggest takeaways. We release new episodes every couple of weeks during the school year. Subscribe and follow Foodagogy on Substack to be kept informed about what is next this season. Until next time, keep questioning what's on your plate and who put it there. I'm Angeline Aow. Irenale, thank you for tuning into Foodagogy. Foodagogy is produced by EKG Collective, with editing by Jitani Heveo and Kirk McDavitt. Music by Paul Romain and artwork by Svi David. Special thanks to Trisha Friedman and Frank Jung for sharing podcasting expertise and encouraging the birth of Foodagogy.